Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got Bicyclelegs back in the seat. How are you, mate?
Yeah, it's good. It's a little bit cooler here tonight, which is nice for once.
Yeah, it's cooling down in Sydney as well. Tonight, or today, we're going to do a show called Show and Tell. And the premise of this show is that we are going to dig out some collectibles or maybe some vinyl CDs that are dear to us and is Australian. 5 collectibles or 5 records or CDs that are kind of special to us, and we wanted to show and tell. So without further ado, Mr. Bicyclelegs, what's your first pick?
Okay, well, my first pick is a little bit of a cheat because technically this is a New Zealand band, but they are one that's very much been adopted as Australian. They're in the ARIA Hall of Fame, so I think we can claim them as Australian as well. At Split Enz, and it's this little CD here, the Rootin' Tootin' Lootin' tapes.
I have that, yes.
Yeah, but this is not just the ordinary Rootin' Tootin' Lootin' tapes, no. This is the 2 CD version that was only available through the Friends of the Enz fan club.
You got me there, mate.
Yeah. I was a life member of the Friends of the Enz fan club for a long time. Unfortunately, it's no longer running. But yeah, these are legendary demos that were recorded by Split Enz in a 2 days in a tiny little recording studio in Luton in England. A lot of these tracks would end up being re-recorded for the Frenzy album. I would argue that most of the versions on the Rootin' Tootin' Lootin' tapes are superior to what ended up on Frenzy. Frenzy's a good album, but it's not well produced as far as I'm concerned. Whereas these, I mean, literally, they were just doing 1 or 2 takes pretty much live in the studio, and they sound better than the sort of produced versions that ended up on Frenzy. But there's also a lot of really good songs on here that never made it into like an official Split Enz release. Songs like Mishaps and Animal Lover. And I mean, a number of these songs also got used as B-sides for singles. Things like Carried Away and Holy Smoke. Some really great Neil songs, I think. Really early Neil songs. And then, yeah, on the second disc, you actually get a couple of songs here from the very short-lived period in Split Enz history in 1978 when Phil Judd rejoined the band for a second time. And there's a couple of his songs on here. One's called I'm So Up, and the other one's called So This Is Love. And they're wonderful songs, and it gives you a little sneak peek into what might have been with a Split Enz that had both Neil and Phil Judd in it.
Interesting.
So, yeah, that's my first pick. It's a wonderful collection. It's very hard to get. Even the 1 CD version of it is out of print now.
Yeah.
And the 2 CD version, yeah, I mean, you had to be a member of the fan club to even be able to get access to that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, one of my favorite little things to have in my collection, and something I still listen to this day, you know.
Yeah. No, that's a nice first pick. I actually picked up the single disc version at our main record retailer, which is JB's Hi-Fi in Australia. It was a very low-key release, and it was in all the stores everywhere. But I must admit, I haven't seen that CD around in the wild for a considerable period of time. So they must have had a very small run of CDs for that particular year. But,
it also did come out in there was a career-spanning box set of like all their albums, and it's in that as well.
Yes. All right. Well, everyone may have seen the Contrarians did a spotlight on my show, the Daydream Nation. You would have heard that I did a little bit of a story about my Holy Grail album. And that Holy Grail album is Stevie Wright from the Easy Beats as a solo artist, Black Eyed Bruiser. So I was looking at my Facebook, and on social media feed, there was an ad from the Velvet Fog in Blue Mountains that they had a sparkly, excellent version or excellent grade version of the Black-Eyed Bruiser. So I get in the car, go to Katoomba, and I secured it, and I finally got this little beauty, Stevie Wright Black-Eyed Bruiser, and it is a beauty. It's in really good nick. I'll try to get this as best I can. There's Stevie. There you go. I played it, and I must admit I was deaf riding it, because when you're spending a lot of money, and I won't tell the viewers how much I spend, you've got to make sure that, you know, you're deaf riding, that the needle's going to get through. There's no pops and no skips. It played beautifully. It's nice and shiny. As a record, it's decent. It doesn't have a breakout hit like EV1, 2, or 3, but it's still pretty solid. And there were two pretty strong. The Vander and Young compositions are the best things about the album. Vander and Young produced this album, but Guitar Band and Black-Eyed Bruiser are the strongest tracks off this album. Came out in 1975. Stevie was right in the middle of a really bad heroin addiction, and he did basically zero promotion for the album, and that's why the album sunk. It came out, I think it hit the top 10, and then it sank without a trace. There's only been 1 or 2 pressings of it, and that's why it's got so much value. You look at Discogs, you'll see how much this album is worth. It's worth a pretty penny. They did a 1 series run on the Albert label on CD, and I'm telling you, on eBay, they're worth thousands of dollars. CD, folks, 1 CD, first pressing, like $1,000 to $2,000. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. I was going to say it's one of those ones where the CD goes for as much, if not more, than the vinyl.
Much more than the vinyl. But look, it's Aussie pub rock. There's a little bit of funk in it. Stevie's probably not in the greatest voice, because he's got that real gravelly voice. You can tell that, maybe he might have been a little bit under the weather, but it's decent. It's not a disaster. It's a solid album, and I'm not disappointed that I've laid out the money and I finally got it. But there's the Desert Island Holy Grail disc that I've always wanted, Stevie Wright Black-Eyed Bruiser, and you just got to stick at it, folks. Sometimes these albums, they pop up. You've just got to keep your eyes and ears open. They do eventually pop up, and for a good price.
Absolutely. And, little tip that I always tell people is, if you use Discogs, put things in your Discogs want list, because every so often you will be lucky enough that someone will not know what something is worth, will list it for well under what it's worth, and you'll be the lucky one who gets in and snaps it up.
Absolutely. Because I've seen that at record stores for very inflated prices.
Yeah.
And these guys at Katoomba, they did a very reasonable price. So a bit of a shout out to the Velvet Fog. Great record store in Katoomba in the Blue Mountains. Check it out if you're any Aussie viewers. But I'm pretty chuffed about that one.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, I hadn't ever seen one of those in the wild, so I didn't even know it was a gatefold. So there you go. Yeah,
but you've seen it. I think it's one of those ones that it's kind of a mythical, very hard to get and quite pricey album. So, and I don't know why. It's just really strange that this album only just did 1 or 2 pressings for a relatively major artist.
Yeah.
All right, mate, what have you got next?
Okay, next I've got a debut EP from this band. And they actually were going by a slightly different name when they did this EP. And that is the Goanna Band.
Right.
For what will end up becoming Goanna.
Interesting.
So it's a 4-track EP. It's on a custom EMI label.
Right, the black label with little silver.
It's sort of a dark green.
Oh, okay. Sorry, dark green.
Yeah, it's all good. But yeah, it's custom pressing by EMI Australia Limited, according to the label.
I don't think I've ever seen that or heard of
Well,
it.
there you go. And there's 4 songs on the EP. There's 2 on each side. 2 of them would end up on their first album, and that is On the Platform and Razor's Edge, or it's actually called Living on the Razor's Edge on here. There's a song that would end up on their second album, which is, I think, an underrated album, and this is an underrated song for Goanna, which is a song called Zanzibar. And then there's one song on here that they never would go and revisit, which is a song called Sometimes. I was lucky enough to pick this up years and years ago before. I mean, it doesn't go for huge money, but it's sort of reasonably priced. But I was able to pick this up for, relatively cheap back in the day, which was really good. And I'm a massive Goanna fan, so it was really great to be able to pick this up and just sort of add it to the collection. It's never had a digital release as far as I know, certainly not CD. So, it's a really good one and well worth listening to if you can find it on YouTube or whatever. The versions of the songs that did make the first and second album are quite different on this EP than they would end up being on the albums. Particularly on the Platform, it's much more up-tempo and full band arrangement. Whereas on the first Goanna album, it's basically just Rose Bygrave singing and playing piano with strings in the background.
Right. Check it out, folks. And to our overseas viewers, Goanna are a legendary band. And look, seriously, never heard it, never seen it. So I'll check that out. It's good. A little backstory to the next one. So again, on the Spotlight show I did with the Contrarians, I was talking about a record that I got when I was very young. So in the 70s, there was, you could send away for albums through Tip Top Bread Company. And my mum, so Tip Top Sunblessed. And my mum in the early 70s filled in this form and sent away for an album, and I happened to win it. And the prize was a prog rock album called Piranha.
Ooh.
Yes. This album is very rare, first pressing on the Harvest label, and it is extremely collectible. But when you're a kid, you do stupid things and you try to put your name on it. I don't know if you can see it, but I put my name on it. Peter Kerr.
Oh, dear. Yes, I was guilty of that back in the day too.
So, I didn't have hindsight when I was a 5 or 6 year old that this would be a very collectible Red Hot Discogs Australian prog rock album on the Harvest label. The album plays beautifully. It's on there weren't too many on the Harvest label, which is the same label as Deep Purple and Pink Floyd. It's very shiny, it plays well, and it's really heavy vinyl. So the grooves, the sound that comes out of it is just wonderful, because there's nothing worse than cheap vinyl where you can flop like a wobble board. How would I describe Piranha? Bit Satana-like, but I like them a lot. And they won the battle. I think they came top 5 in the Battle of the Bands. They played at Sunbury. They had a little bit of a heat. They had put a second album called Piranha 2, and then don't know much more about them. I think they've reissued that album on CD, but that is a collectible one. But yeah, as a kid, writing on labels, and I guess you're the same, Bicyclelegs, when you go to record stores, you see all these crazy things on, what people do where they write on albums. And I've actually got a couple of albums where they do little critiques on the label. Like they tick the songs and put 100% and rate it.
Yeah, I've seen albums where, like the back cover where the track listing is, they'll put little white stickers next to the songs that they like, and those stickers will not come off.
No. That's another interesting thing. There's, I think when you get an album that's 30 or 40 years old and you see a sticker on it or a price, forget it, folks. just leave it on. And that's from experience. But Piranha, that's my choice.
Yeah.
Have you heard of that band?
I've heard of them, but I don't think I've ever sat down and listened to them. I've seen that album cover in sort of vinyl hoarders groups on Facebook and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I didn't know that there was such a thing as Australian prog rock until I went to see Yes in, I think it was 2004, down in Sydney, down your territory.
Mm.
And the opening act was Sebastian Hardy. And they blew me away. They were wonderful. They're the only opening act I've ever seen at a concert that got a standing ovation at the end of their set.
Nice.
So, yeah, I love that band. So I must check Piranha out.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, that's probably the most expensive, even with my Scribble. That's probably the most valuable record of my collection, and that's saying something. So you can imagine what it would have been like if I didn't put Scribble on it. Anyway, over to you.
Okay. Well, this next Australian band are a band that I've been collecting on vinyl for a while. And the two albums that were really sort of holding out on me were their first album and the last album that they did a vinyl release for. And the one I'm going to show is the last album that was a vinyl release for this band. And that is Redback Fever by the Angels.
Right.
And it is on lovely red vinyl.
You know what? That is collectible because that's in the CD age, folks.
Yeah, this is 1991, I think.
In the early 90s, when there was the transition between CD, fully CD, and vinyls as a format getting the flick, there were limited runs of vinyl albums that were being put out, and they're worth a pretty penny. That's worth a bit, Mr. Bicyclelegs.
Yeah. I didn't actually pay too much for this. I was quite lucky there. But yeah, I've since gotten their first album as well. So I now have all the studio albums of the Angels that have been released on vinyl. So happy with that. But this album's actually pretty darn good. It's maybe not an Angels classic, but there's some really good songs on here. Tear Me Apart, the opening track, that's really great. This was the last or second last album where Bob Spencer was in the band, and he'd been in Skyhooks before that. And I think then John Brewster came back after that. Yeah. But I always liked Bob Spencer in Angels. I thought he was really good fit for the band. There's a couple of cover versions on here that I'm not crazy about. I think of Martin Popov, and he's always saying, you know, the bands that he really loves, he doesn't want to hear them doing cover versions. And I can kind of understand that with this band. You know, I'd rather hear them do originals. Although they did do a very good version of We Got to Get Out of This Place, I think, back in the day. But, yeah, this is one I was, you know, sort of holding out for and hoping. And you're right, you know, this will often go for, you know, 3 figures. And
never seen
I didn't pay anywhere near that.
Never seen it. I remember when that got released in the day, and there was a real big push because the album before was a smash in Australia, Beyond Salvation. That went to #1. I think from memory, the Angels have only had 2 #1 albums. One is their greatest hits, and Beyond Salvation. I mean, Face to Face is their most popular album, but that never went to #1.
Yeah.
That was following it up. It didn't do as well, but there was, I can just visualize in HMV Records, there was just this huge figurine of that cover. And it took up a lot of real estate at HMV with all the paraphernalia. But I don't recall seeing an album. Yeah. So, that must have been a limited run. And
Well, Beyond Salvation itself is not an easy one to get on vinyl either. It was actually a double disc set in Australia, two vinyl set. And I was lucky enough to pick that up in surprisingly good nick years and years ago in a cheap bin, like, you know, $5 or $10.
Yeah.
So
you just got to keep trawling. There's always, you get nuggets. No, that's a really good one. All right. This one is, you know, it's worth a little bit of money. I wouldn't say it's an ultra rare album, but this band was like what I would call cowpunk, cow garage rock. I think they were maybe, if you cross country and western with the Hoodoo Gurus, you would come up with a band called the Johnnies.
The Johnnies. I thought you were going to be talking about them.
And the thing that I like about it is it's one of the ones that you can, it's like the, you know, the circle where you can just change all the different characters. It's got kind of a wheel, a selector. Yeah. This is a great album. There's going to be a showdown the day Marty Robbins died. Greenback Dollar, Move It, The Edge of Death. I used to see this band in the day. They're great live. To all those folk, if you like the Hoodoo Gurus, you'd love this band, but they've got maybe a bit more of a punky and a bit of more of a country and western feel. Fantastic. And, you know, basically they were led by the late, great Spencer P. Jones. I just thought I'd throw in this album. I think this is one of his final albums before he passed away, and the Nothing Buts. And there's your mate there. You know who that is, don't you?
Oh, is that what's
Mr. Baker?
Drummer? Yeah, from the Hoodoo Gurus.
Yeah, James Baker. But look, this band was led by the wonderful Spencer P. Jones, and just infectious, melodic garage rock meets country, and you know, you got the Ramones, you got the Datsuns, and you've got the Johnnies, and you know, I guess they were confined to a certain image. They had a bit of a following with the punk crowd in the late 80s, and I think because a lot of people sort of saw that there was a bit of humor, but there was great musicology, and they had that sort of punk do-it-yourself attitude. And they should have been bigger, but they were a fantastic live act in the late 80s. But check this out. Highlights of Dangerous Life, the Johnnies. And that's my third show and tell.
What about you? Love me a die cut sleeve.
Yes. What's your next one?
My next one is, funnily enough, I would say that of this band's catalogue, this is the weakest album that they put out. But the reason I've got this is it will become obvious when I show it up. And the band is Men at Work. The album is Two Hearts. And this is autographed by Colin Hay and Greg Ham. So I picked this up years and years ago on eBay. And I don't think they knew what those autographs were worth, especially considering that, of course, Greg Ham no longer with us.
Yes.
So
you got it for a reasonable amount?
Yeah, it was. I think I only paid like $20 for it or something ridiculous like that. But this was a bit before the sort of vinyl revival had really kicked in, so I probably was a bit lucky there. But it's still a good album. It's just those first two Men at Work albums for me are just so iconic and classic. That the third one doesn't quite, you know, they sort of bring in some, they lost their rhythm section, basically, their drummer and their bass player. And at least some of the drums were replaced with drum machines, and it doesn't really suit the Men at Work sound. There's still some good songs on there, though. It's definitely not a stinker by any stretch. It just doesn't, for me, compare with those first two albums. But yeah, you know, to be able to pick up an autographed copy for, as I say, I think it was $20 or something like that.
Nice. Nice.
Had to have it.
Yeah. I've seen that album a lot in bargain bins.
Yes.
And I've always been tempted to just take it home and give it a whirl, but I haven't. But maybe, listening to you talk about it, I might give it a chance. But it did flop. It didn't do well in Australia. I think it hit number 15. And after the phenomenal success of Cargo and prior to that, Business as Usual, it was a major disappointment. So, yeah, interesting case study, that band. 3 albums and over and out.
Still went gold in the US, though.
Yeah, I think you could really just do Business in the lower reaches of the charts and struggle to gold.
Yeah.
So, I think, even if you hit number 45 and just sell consistently, you'd probably sort of reach gold. But have you got any theories of why it sort of flopped after the monumental success of the it was like if you looked at the graph, it'd go like this and then it just like fall off the edge of a cliff.
I think there's a couple of issues there. I think firstly the band was disintegrating. I mean, as I say, the drummer and the bass player left before the album was recorded, and then Ray Stryker, the lead guitar player, left sort of partway through the recording. Although he's still pictured in the gatefold. There's the 3 of them in the gatefold there.
Yeah.
But it's partly that. It is a step down in quality. As I say, those first 2 albums are just so good that it is a step down in quality. I think it's probably a bit of those 2 things. And maybe it was just, the infatuation with them in America in particular was just sort of, and there was a couple of years gap between them too. So that can be deadly, but it's unusual that it's a 3rd album that it falls over the cliff. It's usually the 2nd album. So, first 2 are just so massive. They have a little sabbatical or there's, a gap, and then it's like, poof, right down the edge of the cliff. But you've got to remember, in America, those first 2 albums, Business as Usual and Cargo, came out within months of each other. So they're really...
That's unusual too, isn't it?
Whereas there was a bit more of a gap here in Australia because I think Business as Usual had come out in 1981 here, but it didn't come out till 82 in the US. And then Cargo came right out sort of on top of it in 83. So...
Yeah. Such an unusual story, the Men at Work story. Literally, I've read articles, interviews with Colin Hay, and saying that they were playing some pub in Fitzroy one year, and 1 year later they're playing arenas in America.
Yeah,
as a headliner. So
headlining the US Festival in 83, I think.
Yes. Few Aussies on that day, weren't there? Was Divinals. They were in that.
And I think In Excess might have played too, but way down the bill.
That could be part of the reason. In Excess. So like Australia was kind of the flavour of the month in the first part of the decade, or like during the 80s, let's face it, they were quite the flavour of the month in America. So maybe the public just went on to In Excess and Men at Work was seen as a bit passé.
Yeah.
So, alrighty, I'm going to talk about the category of soundtracks. So I'm cheating a little bit, and I'm going to just put a spotlight on 2 soundtracks that a bit hard to get and a little bit, I guess, collectible. The first one is a soundtrack that was written by Ivor Davies of Icehouse, and I'm talking about Razorback.
Oh, yes.
So this is just like Ivor Davies going crazy on a Fairlight synthesizer. And let's face it, from 83 onwards, Fairlight synthesizer was king. And I don't know if you've seen the movie. It's trashy. It's enjoyable. But
I probably did way back in the day, but I haven't seen it for a very long time.
Yeah. The pig looks a bit fake, but it's enjoyable. But it's a very atmospheric Tangerine Dream type of soundtrack, and Tangerine Dream are right in my wheelhouse. I love the soundtracks that they do. But it's a good little soundtrack. I got this at a record fair. I haven't seen it in the wild that often. There's a bit of insert in there. Sorry. There you go. So, yep, that's my pick, Razorback with Ivor Davies. Now, the next one is an album based on a soundtrack movie called Freedom. And this was written by Don Walker.
Oh, okay.
Now, Freedom starred John Blake, the late John Blake. It's a bit of a teenage movie on the run. They steal a car and they just go wild. It's very, it's basically got a lot of 3/4 of Cold Chisel playing all the way through, but there's an interesting track on it. There's a song called Speed Kills, and it's got the vocals Michael Hutchins, supported by basically the 3/4 of Cold Chisel. You've got Ian Moss, Phil Small, Steve Presswich, that's a bit of a collector's. So I've never seen this album in the wild. The only time I've seen them at record fairs, it's worth a pretty penny. I got this quite cheap. It's in good nick, but this is the soundtrack, Freedom. It's an Australian film. Have you heard it or seen this one before?
No, that one's new to me. When you mentioned Razorback, when you were sort of talking about it before you actually revealed it, I thought you might have been going to talk about Boxers, which is another Ivor Davies Ice House soundtrack. That was for a dance. Like a ballet.
I haven't got that one, but if I see
I've got it on
it.
CD. I don't think it ever got a vinyl release, but the Razorback one was Richard Mulcahy was the director. Russell Mulcahy, sorry, and he was like a famous director of music video clips.
It's like one long video clip.
That was his feature film debut.
Yes. Well, the movie is like one long music video clip. There's lots of smoke machines and it's all very atmospheric and the lighting. It's enjoyable, but is it a great film? I don't know. I'll let others judge that. But the soundtrack's it's pretty good. All righty. What's your next one?
Okay, my last one is kind of a combination of the last two that I showed. A, because it's on coloured vinyl, and B, because it's autographed. Now, this one I actually picked up. It was a Gumtree ad. Gumtree is like a website for those who are not in Australia. It's sort of like a classifieds website. And people can buy and sell all sorts of stuff. And I used to go through the Gumtree, it still do sometimes, go through the Gumtree ads looking for records. And I'd actually responded to this one to get a inexpensive copy of the Bruce Springsteen live box set.
Oh, here we go.
And I bought that. And then as I'm going out, this one catches the corner of my eye in their living room. And I just kind of happened to mention, oh, is that one for sale? And they said, yeah. I said, how much? And I think they said something like $15. I said, sold. And that is, sorry, I've just got a pop up on my screen. That is Living in the 70s. This is the 10th anniversary edition. It's on gold vinyl, see-through. And,
lovely.
I'll have to hold it up to the screen because it's only in ballpoint pen, but it is signed by Greg McCanch and the late great Shirley Strawn.
How can people sell that for $15? I
don't know.
Well done, son. Well done.
The price sticker, which, as you mentioned, you don't take off, is on. It's still on there, and it says $11.99. So maybe they thought they were making a profit. Who knows? But I couldn't pass that by when I saw that because not only is it autographed, not only is it coloured vinyl, limited edition.
Yep.
But it has 2 bonus tracks on it, which you don't normally get bonus tracks on vinyl records. But this has got a live versions, funnily enough, of 2 songs that aren't originally on this album. It's got a live version of Saturday Night, which is off their second album. And then from their fourth album, it's got a live version of Why Don't You All Get, and I won't say the last word.
Yeah.
But yeah, also, you can see right there, it's hand numbered, 9/13 of 2000. So there's only 2,000 copies of this in all of existence.
Well, green with envy I am. No, that is worth a triple figure at least. Folks, overseas folks, Skyhawks are legendary Australian band, huge in the 70s. And I think that, through age and through time, that the worth of that album is just going to increase threefold.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a great album anyway. It was the best-selling Australian album in Australia until bloody John Farnham came along with Whispering Jack. I think it's still the best-selling debut album by an Australian artist to this day.
Yeah, it's up there. It's up there because I was thinking Man of Colours is one of the biggest selling band albums, but it's definitely got some sort of in one of those categories as the highest selling. That's magnificent. Well done. There you go, guys. There's a lesson there. You've just got to keep your eyes and ears open because there's things out there that you can just get for a steal. You just got to be in the know. And sometimes record fairs are not the way to go, because I think just from experience at record fairs, you can go up to the cellar and you can haggle, but in general, you don't get good value. It's those op stores. It's those places where people have records on site and they don't have any bloody idea in respect of what they've got.
I think
they're the sort of places that you can pick up gems.
Yeah, I think record fairs are usually not great places to pick up rare or collectible stuff, but they're often very good for picking up just good sort of regular run-of.
I love record fairs, and if you want to pick up bulk stuff, they do have rare stuff, but usually the people that sell it at such over-the-top prices, and I'm talking about like four-figure sums, and the apostrophe is in the wrong area. Forget it. But look, they're a lot of fun, but I'm just saying, to get those little success stories of these little nuggets, you've got to go to your, they call it America thrift shops, or your Salvation Army or your op shops. They're the places that you look and you dig in the cartons, usually tucked away in the corner, and you can come up with some real gems. You've got to go through all those Richard Clayderman and James Last and Kamal albums, but every so often you will find a little piece of gold. Yes, you will. Yes, you will. All right. My next one is the topic of compilations. I'm a big fan of compilations, and a lot of these bands are very obscure. They mean a lot to me. And look, one day they may be worth something might be collectible. So in no particular order, this is called On the Waterfront, Volume 3. This was a record label that was big in the 80s. There was a record store called Waterfront. They had the Hard-Ons, the Spunk Bubbles, Mass Appeal. To fans of punk rock overseas, you've probably heard of those bands. So this has Mass Appeal. This has Rat Cat before they became big. All these different sort of bands. And I picked this up at a Waterfront show at the trade union in the late 80s. They had one of those sort of mini big day out festivals at this particular venue, and they had all the Waterfront acts, and they were selling this, or I think it might have been part of the price. So I've seen that. This one's cool. Fun fact. The first Nirvana album, Bleach, was originally released in Australia on Waterfront Records. Absolutely, and worth a pretty penny. Oh, yes. And I've got a lot of my friends who bought it, and they just are laughing. But I didn't get it anyway. This is one of those metal compilations, Thunder from Down Under. So some of those metal bands that were big in the 80s, Doesn't even have any pictures inside. It's just got lyric sheets. But some of the bands were like Lightning Rock, Godspeed, Lotus. Yep. So that was like in the local metal scene. Another Waterfront compilation on the Waterfront. These bands are the Scholars, the Pranksters, the Trips, Love Minus Zero. They're all power punk on the Waterfront label. Again, this is all very kind of obscure. Compilation called Before Birdman, Volume 3. And this is Australian rock, R&B and punk prior to 1977. You've got bands like the Atlantics, the Five, Jeff St. John, Pink Finks, Cherokees and 4/4s. So if you like your garage rock, it's a bit of a smorgasbord. And finally, this is an album called 2SM, which is a radio station that used to be a big radio station in the 70s. It's a decade of Australian hits, 1960 to 1970. And it's done in a format of like a listening to the radio. There's no tracks in between. There's no space between the tracks. It's just one song onto the other. It starts off with Cold Joy, Johnny O'Keefe, Lucky Star, and then it goes, second side, Normie Rowe, The Executives, John Farnham, Flying Circus, and then you've got Russell Morris, Doug Parkinson in Focus. So it starts off in the golden age of the old and rock and roll of Australian rock, and then it finishes to, some of the later 60s psych rock hits. And this album my brother actually had, and that was the first time I ever heard the Real Thing by Russell Morris, and it blew my mind. So just compilation. I don't know if they've got much value, but I just love these little compilation albums, Australian ones where they have all these little bands that may have only put a single or two, like similar to the Nuggets series. Yeah, just little oddities. I like those sort of records.
We should mention that band Focus is not the same as the Dutch prog band Focus.
Doug Parkinson in Focus. Yeah, absolutely. And what I should have brought, and I didn't, is I've got a couple of signature on CDs. I got a Masters Apprentices. What is it? I got one of their albums signed by Jim Keys, late Jim Keys, the lead singer. I got Russell Morris to sign his greatest hits. And I also got Daryl Cotton to sign a Zoot greatest hits. So nice. I went and saw Keys, Cotton and Burns, or one of those about 20 years ago. And after the show, they sign it. And they're not, half of those guys are no longer with us. So it just validates what if getting a signature on an album, and especially if the artist departs this mortal coil, the value just increases threefold.
Yeah, back in the day when you could actually do that without having to pay big money for a VIP experience.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Bicyclelegs. This has been fun.
Always a pleasure.
We'll do this again. We might do another show and tell with other collectibles, non-Australian. So please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Please check out Bicyclelegs on his channel. He's on plenty of shows. He's also on the Contrarians. I'll put the link on this particular show as to get to his YouTube channel. And we really like reading your comments. Tell us what you think. Tell us some Australian collectibles that you have. We'll do a show very soon. See you later. Cheers.
Thanks for having me.